Welcome back to the 40K Fireside podcast, where I'm just redoing this introduction, just keeping it fresh with the times. Just going to give you guys a friendly reminder that if you do enjoy our content, maybe consider dropping some kind of like, comment, or subscribe, or just engage with the discussion. Help out that internet algorithm. And we're going to be releasing some new stuff kind of soon. Hopefully we'll have some exciting news. And without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
And welcome everyone to episode 21 of 40K Fireside. This is a pretty exciting episode because we've just come back from Warhammer Fest, the 360-person Super-Major, the first Games Workshop Open event that we've had in the UK. And our team, Team Ignite, did extremely well at this tournament. We had 3 players go into the top 16, which is the final bracket, the kind of elimination rounds to get your final ranking. And that's pretty impressive considering 5 of us went. So we've got one of them with me, who's my co-host today, David Gaylard, who went all the way through to the finals and finished the event in an amazing second place, which is an amazing job, Dave. So congrats.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was. It's kind of surreal when you get to that 8-0 mark, and you're like, I've won 8 games in a row, and then like even 9-0 is even more crazy than that, right? You're like 9 games straight. Like in practice that might happen, but in your practice games, but in the tournament games, like man, 8 games straight.
Absolutely. It's a complete marathon. I'm amazed you're able to kind of record straight off of it now, but we've got to get the information to you guys today. So we're going to go through kind of Dave's list, which is an Astra Militarum list, but it's not exactly what you would think. This is one of the things I was most impressed during the list design phase with Dave, was that he was really digging for creative options on his list design to help deal with both the meta and the terrain. And I think he really hit the mark there. We will touch a little bit on my side of things as well. I brought my my classic Eldar list, but we've kind of gone through that over and over again, and I didn't do quite so well. I did take a loss, and I went 4-1-1 before not playing through to the final day because I was not in the top in the final bracket. So we're going to be focusing a lot on Dave and his game and his philosophies and ethos, because there are even a few games on stream here if you wanted to kind of go back and see how Dave kind of played these games out, because he really did the last few games very masterfully, in my opinion.
It's a big compliment.
Yeah, really, like such a huge, vast improvement from when I kind of first met you to see the development to this stage. And people were singing your praises in chat as well about how well you were playing. So we're going to stop making you blush quite so much now. And did you have anything else you wanted to kind of plug or say at this point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we'll be focusing, I guess, on my tournament run, but we also had Brian Seipp from Team Ignite, who was playing, was it point for point, the same list as you, Vic?
Point for point, spell for spell, every single thing.
Oh, yeah. So he ended up coming 3rd place, getting the golden ticket, full flights, expenses paid, because Innes Wilson, spoiler alert, and I already had one. Then we had one of our teammates, Christopher Radford, who is the newest joiner, but is a regular on UKTC scene. He came 10th, playing Space Wolves. Then we had Jockle, who came at the top, I believe, or just about at the top of the second bracket, so the bracket that wasn't the top 16 cut. So I mean, a huge performance for our whole team. It was really cool to see everyone do super well, and more so than that, just our preparation coming together. I think because this is not a UKTC event, so it's one of those events where it's the most wide open, I think, right?
Yeah, and everyone wanted to attend it, so we had every single really good player and quite a few good players from Europe as well attend the event. So it was a proper Shark Tank, and it's quite a challenging tournament, really. And not only the player side of things, but like you mentioned, the terrain is the terrain that the Americans are more used to than us. We've never played on this terrain in real life. So that was, I think that is going to be a really big talking point for us this episode, to kind of discuss the pros and cons of the terrain and how we kind of feel about it going forward, because I'm pretty sure, based on the success of this event, that there's going to be a few more kind of Games Workshop Opens here in the UK.
Yeah, and I would hope so. So perhaps on that note, let's go through the Warhammer Fest, because obviously there was a big convention happening at the same time. It was, we're unsure on the exact numbers, but it was supposed to be 14,000 people, attendees. spread across those 3 days. So if I'm going to be talking a lot, Vic, why don't you talk about what you thought about the Warhammer Fest and maybe what was one of your favorite parts about it aside from the tournament and kind of like what the general atmosphere was like.
So I'm going to start off with my opening scene when I went to queue at this event. It's a lot of people, so there was a big queue to get in, but they did it pretty efficiently, to be honest. The organization throughout was great. But during this, I was queuing behind 3 Deathwatch Space Marines and their fellow Inquisitor. And that really set the scene because I think this compared to a UKTC event, which is UKTC events is a concentration of pure amazing Warhammer, competitive Warhammer. This was a collection of pure awesome Warhammer energy, just like all spectrums of Games Workshop games and events and things. And it just felt like such a positive, nerdy vibe when you get there. I think the atmosphere was great. The organization was amazing. And in the corner somewhere, they hit us, the competitive 40K players.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you got to the competitive 40K side of things, it had a very different feel to kind of most tournaments I've been to. But I'd say before we kind of go into the details, my overall rating of the event and the experience is pretty positive overall, I'd say.
What
Maybe
would you
not
give it out of a 10 if you had to give it a number?
out of a 10 as an event, I would give it a 9. As a
Yep.
competitive 40K event, I'd probably give it a 7. And
Okay.
that's and most of that score is because the organization was good rather than the actual kind of format or terrain and things.
Yeah. I think I would probably end on. There's obviously bias here, guys, because I placed well. I would probably end it on somewhere between a 7 and an 8 from a competitive point of view. There were some things. There were overall, I really, really liked it. There were just a few tweaks that I think would make it an absolutely excellent S class tournament. There were a few things that were done differently from UKTC, and then for the overall convention, I really enjoyed it because I'd never been to like a Comic Con convention before or something. I would love to go to a Star Trek convention, of course. But I've never seen like the cosplayers and stuff like that. And even as someone who doesn't, perhaps enjoy that part of the hobby side as clearly as some people do. It's just really cool, isn't it? You're like, oh, that's that guy. That's who they had the Dire Avenger
The Dire
cosplay.
Avenger. Oh my gosh, I got so excited when I saw that Dire
Yeah.
Avenger. I just ran up to her and I was just like, "Oh my god, I have this army. I have a Dire Avenger Exarch just like you." And she's like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, there was an incubi there as well, which looked
There's
really
an
good as
incubi.
well.
We just ignored the
Yeah.
incubi. The Dire Avenger is cooler.
And what was really cool, I thought, was the atmosphere of the tournament was really shaded by the fact that there were regular Warhammer or hobbyists that could enter the tournament, the tournament playing table. So I don't know if you got this a lot, but I certainly had just a ton of people, looking at the games, looking at the models, being like, "Oh, what is that model? Look at these models," and et cetera, et cetera. So
Mhm.
I kind of like that, obviously, because we don't usually get that at a UKTC event. Everyone is there to compete. If you've got a standout, awesome-looking model, people will point that out. But for the large part, it felt like a lot of, for a Magic the Gathering reference, like a kitchen top table players who were kind of seeing competitive Warhammer for maybe their first time in a very large tournament. And them being like, oh, actually, people think this is really good or that's really good. So it was cool to see those people engaging in the tournament, and hopefully they think that this is a really cool thing to do in the future and come and play the tournament scene a bit more often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was such a vibe, and I'm hoping that everyone enjoyed it because it certainly looked like everyone did. I mean, I want to just kind of like zoom in a little bit more to the competitive side of things because I think that's what most of our listeners are kind of involved in, and kind of the pros and cons of things. You mentioned something about the terrain a little bit ago, and saying that it was really good, but there were potentially some tweaks that you would recommend. What was
Yeah.
your overall take on kind of the pros and cons of the terrain?
Yeah, so I think this is we don't play on this terrain at all. So this is the first time I think most people in the UK have ever played on this terrain physically in person, right? So our take on it was a little bit different. And naturally speaking, the terrain that we normally play on, some concepts translate over to this terrain and miss the mark in some way, right? So the method and stuff that was bring, we can't say was ultimately as optimal as possible, but I think we had a really good take on it. Anyway, that's the point. The terrain. So what happened, guys, is they split the tournament up into day 1 terrain format, day 2 terrain format, and day 3 terrain format. Now, day 2 and 3 are the same table layouts. Day 1 had a different layout. Now, the day 1 layout wasn't good, I don't think. It wasn't what any competitive player, I think, would go up and stand and put their hand up and say, this is a great map layout for interesting, dynamic games. And primarily, that's because you have too much line of sight into your opponent's deployment zone. That would be the biggest thing to improve for that terrain layout, in my opinion. I don't know what you do. Is that the biggest thing for that map layout for you?
I think it's completely like unplayable, that day 1 terrain format. When people think about the layouts, they probably think about layout 2, which was the main one that we used for day 2 and 3. But this layout that we used for day 1, which was for hammer and out, so long ways and diagonals missions, and I think they've introduced it to try and mix up the format, but it's designed so poorly to the point that you can't hide your army at all without being in the open. And I walked past so many people and I was like, oh, how'd your game go? And I think it was Mike Costello who just went, I played Tau, this terrain. He went first. And
that exact game was that was round 3 and he played against Carl Grundy and I was right on the table next
example.
to him. So the problem with that layout is that you, without even having a fast moving shooting platform, you were able to see into your opponent's deployment zone. And that was detrimental to a lot of people. And this is a really good example, I think, of one of the parts of the tournaments that if they just tweaked a little bit would cover a huge blank spot. Like, let's say, Vic, if that terrain layout was as good as this day 2, like, would your rating of the tournament go up from 7 instantly up to an 8, more or less?
Yeah, I think the layout 2, from a competitive standpoint, is actually pretty good. And I think the discrepancy between how good the first layout and the second layout is absolutely huge. And I think I would agree. It would be a bit boring, I think, potentially, because it's literally the same terrain every game. And the terrain does have a risk of being very passive and stagey. So I think potentially across 9 rounds, you would probably get really sick of it and want to play something else. But from a competitive point of view, layout 2 is solid, and the first layout is just unplayable, in my opinion.
So if they were able to solve some of the core issues with the first day 1 layout, you think that would vastly improve the overall experience?
I think the problem is the main layout is set up to work on every single terrain. Every single mission, except for it is every single mission. It can be played on long ways, short ways, and diagonals. So I think they've perfected this one layout, and they're trying to change the essentially perfect layout to something else, which will always be worse than the main layout.
So perhaps they need to move to just having like 3 layouts for 3 different mission types, for example. That doesn't seem too hard to achieve as well.
Yeah, the problem is they're limited by their type of terrain that they're using, which are these perspex squares with little ruined walls around them. And I personally think the variation could be changing the amount of coverage of ruined walls, and also the slight position of the perspex squares. But I think they are a little bit locked in where they can put those perspex squares, and you see that with layout 1, where in your deployment zone you only have a single ruin, a single big U-shaped ruin, and that is the fundamental problem of everything. Having just one of those in your deployment zone in these missions means that you can't really hide your army at all. You need 2, which is what happens on the main layout.
So it's These are kind of some of the big questions that we had going into the tournament, right? Was what missions will we be playing? What terrain layouts will we be playing? Where will the ruins be placed on the terrain? That was a big thing that we discovered when we got there, that they will be pushed right to the front, which was good for some layouts, but very poor for others. So on this layout that we talked about, the poor one, if those ruin walls were back further through the halfway point of the home objective deployment perspex plate, that would have changed a lot. And so what was your strategy going into the tournament with so many variables, Vic, in terms of your army list submission?
Well, I'm going to start off with the tongue-in-cheek strategy because I think this was an issue that we highlighted last time, is that there's no fixed measurements for the ruins.
Mm,
And one thing that I saw, I'm not going to name any names at all here, but I'm going to say that if you moved your ruins a little bit, especially the ones in the middle, you blocked off line of sight, anything like that, created more space to tuck a tank in behind your big pieces, and then your opponent called a judge, the judge will be completely fine with the final position of the
mm,
ruins. And that is not policeable at all. And I think it has such drastic effects on the outcome of games that this terrain format would be significantly better with fixed positions of the actual large perspex squares
mm,
and the little perspex squares in the middle.
mm.
The ruin wall placement, actually, I felt like that can just be thrown anywhere because it's very easy for players just to put that along the edge and it's
Mm.
fine. But the actual big perspex squares, especially the ones in the middle, can completely block out the center of the board and
Yeah.
create a passive game. Or if you just push them further apart, you can see right down the middle of the board.
Yeah, and that one little piece right there was quite inconsistent in both the judge's opinion of it and what the official stance was. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be the second most dramatic improvement I think they could make. And that's very simple to implement. You simply just say there has to be a line down the middle of the board, right through the middle objective, parallel to the long board edge. It's very easy to implement, very easy for a lot of players to understand, and that will just clarify a lot anything that could happen as well, right?
That's true. I love that solution because the reason why they don't have fixed measurements is to stop people practicing and perfectly getting their strategies down and
Mm,
knowing, if I have 24 inches of range, I can exactly reach the corner of this ruin.
mm,
But your solution with some descriptive kind of factors on the main things,
mm,
like there must be enough space, like for a knight to go around the ruin or something like that.
mhm. Yeah.
More kind of just subjective-y, descriptive-y things
Mhm.
would make a huge difference, I think.
Yeah, for sure. What I would say is though there were a lot of memes and myself, in fact, saying that how are they with no measurements? How are they going to enforce the terrain, etc. But what I would say is that the judging team would go through every single table between
Mm.
the rounds and readjust the terrain. I say readjust, but they do have the measurements, so there is a
Mhm.
way which they
Oh, they have
change
measurements?
the
I didn't
terrain.
realize that.
There is another the small side piece. They actually use that to measure inwards for the big placement of the ruins.
Okay,
So they
that's
would
fine
actually
then.
go and reset every single table throughout the rounds. However, however, there is no exact measurement for the middle ruin. So
Oh, that's the key one.
exactly. So yeah. So that was the most eyeballed one, and which is quite deterministic about how a game may or may not play out. So
Right. Okay.
yes, but I think overall the judging was good. We
The head judge was great as well,
yes,
actually.
yeah, big shout. So yeah, big shout out to the
Justin
head
Burgess.
judge,
Yeah.
Justin, who officiated. I think two of my stream games, and then helped me out with a few of other games. There was also another UK judge there who, oh, I'm going to forget your name. Sorry, mate. Who was there as well? Who goes to UKTC tournaments. He was a super nice guy as well. He helped me with a couple of questions as well. So that was great to see. And for the first time, the rules team, I think, were actually actively judging as well. So the people that write the rules for the game were out in the wild and seeing how the rules were being used and interpreted, which I think is overall a really positive thing for the game development, right? It's good to see people that are very close to the game enjoying, the tournament scene and seeing how that things could actually play out, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a big part of it. The guy who
Mm.
checked me in was part of the development team, and he just
Mhm.
asked, "What's my opinion on things?" And that kind of interaction is going to be really beneficial, I hope.
Okay, I've got another interesting point. So,
Hmm.
something that came up very often was the use of a clock or the absence of a use of a clock.
Hmm.
Now, this came up, I would say, almost every round. And
Hmm.
what we mean by that is that no clocks were enforced or used. You could only use a clock if both your opponents actually decided to use one. And what this meant is that a lot of the games didn't reach their natural, well, a lot of the games didn't meet their natural conclusion under the predetermined time for the round within the tournament. Now,
Yes.
there's a bit of a domino effect there because some of the rounds were starting a bit later considering the fact that players have to pack up their armies, move to the table, explain their armies, etc., etc. We usually have, I think, 15 minutes for that at UKTC, and some of the rounds here were starting on the round timer when the pairings were up. So, clearly that eats into quite a significant part of the round timer. But what happened quite often is that if a game was running close to overtime, a judge would be called to the table and would officiate the game past the actual round timer. So they would go, okay, we're going to play the next 20 minutes. We're going to split the clock, 10 minutes for you, 10 minutes for you. If the game still hasn't been decided by that point, we will discuss turn 5 through the judge's eyes. Now, I don't think I think the absence of chess clocks is a negative thing, in my opinion. I think that's the only fair way to ensure that both players get to use the same amount of time. And that's a really critical thing about tournament play. However, on the other side, I think given the absence of chess clocks and that's their decision, the way that they did it, I thought was actually quite well done.
Yeah,
and I didn't see many arguments or things like that erupting from their ultimately kind of subjective interpretation or things like that, right?
I think the big advantage is in the UK, we're very used to playing with chess clocks, or at least playing 2 time on rounds because, it's hard dice down usually at the events that we play on. So a lot of people were able to just kind of play naturally. And if the game's going too slow, you feel it and you just kind of speed up even without the clock. And then to have this backup thing where there was some really interesting tight games going on,
a lot.
and then those were able to actually be played out the last few turns, even though time had run out.
Yep.
And I saw the judges were there, and they would be like, "Look, you guys, the round is ending, and you guys have 9 minutes each on this clock, and you can't go beyond it." And they would actively manage the clock.
Yep.
The big thing I noticed was this only happened kind of like 1 or 2 at most games per round. So it was actually a very small proportion where it actually happened and they were able to manage it.
Yeah, and oftentimes it was Justin the judge managing those games. And he was managing the crowd of people that were watching really well as well. He'd tell, look, guys, you need to go away. We're trying to get this game done, et cetera, as well. The only small criticism I would have is sometimes a judge would be actively, what they would call actively judging in air quotes, the game before the round timer has done. And I heard a few people say that actually slowed the game down because I think some of the judges here don't necessarily appreciate how well everyone in the UK knows each other. And those players might be, this might have been the 15th time they've played together, right? And they're going, oh, yeah, just move this guy here, move this guy here. And the judge might go, that's not done properly, that's not done properly. But the reality is that they really know each other super well and they're just playing the game in abstraction, right? So that would be the only thing I'd say. But there's pros and cons to both of those situations. Ultimately, I would love to see them move to a chess clock. Because chess clocks, I think, are extremely important in the community. And Warhammer is essentially a game of chess in that the more time you take, the more opportunity you have to play better. And if the time is not shared, if the time is shared between 2 people and one player takes a significantly longer part of the time, then they're effectively advantaged to make better decisions because they have more time to think about it.
So my suggestion would be kind of like a compromise, like what you suggested with the terrain positioning. And I would say that on day 2, anyone who's undefeated should have the option to play on a chess clock. So should be able, if one player says, I would like to play on a chess clock for this game and enforce chess clock rules, they should have that option. So it only impacts just the most competitive players in the event, and the less competitive players and the people who are, more chilled out about the outcome of games. They can have a more relaxed environment, which was quite successful by not using chess clocks, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a beautiful solution, actually. You just say anyone in the top 16 can request a thing, or the top 16 or the bracket below it, for example, right? And that would be a good compromise to most people, perhaps. So, I think the broad takeaway is that actually it was ran really well. So, shout out to Mike and the team there. I think one of my critiques may be that there was a dissemination of information around how the tournament would be run. Okay, what I would say, the tournament was run very well, and the team of judges was run very well, but I don't think it's professional is not the right word, but I don't think it's appropriate to discuss the very important parts of the tournament in non-public ways. And there is, there's been kind of messages and messenger groups, photos shared around of, potentially people who are involved from the tournament saying, oh yeah, this will be this will be that. And we don't get that with the UKTC. Zach is very clear on having either all the information up front or no one gets the information. Like, even we know Zach very well, but we don't get anything at all. He's a very hard policy on that. I think that's a positive avenue to move the development in there as well, right?
Yeah, I have one final question on this topic before we move on to to our kind of tournament, and I would ask you, what terrain format do you think is better, or what do you prefer between GW and UKT? See how I'm asking this question to be on the safe side of it? So, yes, Dave. So what do you think?
I think that for replayability and planning and ultimate competitiveness, UKTC is better. But I think that for the quality of games that get produced, that the layout for day 2 and 3 is actually better than UKTC. In my opinion, I think the games
of creating tight games.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that's been evidenced by the games that we saw in the top 16, and I think that's also evidenced in the dynamism of the lists that were brought in the top 16 that were allowed to bubble through to the top 16. So I think the stats are undeniable. If you look at the meta diversity in the top 16, from that, which is largely born out of players making decisions around that heavy terrain board, I think it's pretty clear cut that is a successful recipe. What do you think? You have to answer as well.
I would make a counterpoint to your final point here. I think that where the meta is currently, following this balanced data slate, is actually relatively healthy. And I think any major tournament would probably have a healthy meta diversity here. And on top of that, another part of why we see this diversity is probably because none of us know what we're doing with GW terrain. So we're all kind of going in with our own creative ideas. And when you have a new thing, people always come up with creative solutions to it, because we have no kind of data to fall back on. So I think that's one side of it. In terms of answering the question that I asked you, I would say that in terms of creating engaging competitive games, I think the UKTC and also I consider UKTC and WTC quite similar. I would say both of those are much better competitive terrain formats. The games are really exciting, and they're not just purely mathematically strategized out, which is what I think can happen on the GW terrain. You can kind of map out your score, especially if you have slightly passive secondaries, and be like, okay, so my only win condition in this game is to take away this objective for one turn. So I'm not going to do anything else except just aim to get that and win the game at the end. That's my take. I would prefer to see UKTC be the absolute main way that we play games here, but I love that we have GW as an alternative now.
Yeah. So, sorry, there's so much stuff to unpack there. Is that based on the poor map terrain and the good map terrain? Because mine was solely based on the good map terrain.
Yeah, I'm just ignoring that the bad one exists, because just based on the good one, the relatively good one.
I think you're also right in so many ways. Is that the people that understood the way that the games flow on those terrain, I think, have been the most successful at this tournament. Because I found that throughout the day, I kind of understood how a lot of the games would flow, even on those very dense boards. So I think it's very easy to see in the future that actually once people map out and play on these terrains a lot more, that perhaps the meta would just tighten up a lot, and we would become a lot more granite, like the UKTC meta is, really, isn't it? Yeah, which is great. That's the Warhammer Fest tournament from a competitive perspective, I guess. Next part, we'll cut to some music and we'll be chatting about, I guess, my run, I suppose.
And that's it.
Sounds good. We'll see you guys in a bit. Alrighty, so we're back at it. Now we had, of the team coming, we had Jockle Johansson playing Deathwatch, which I was very close to submitting as well. I think Deathwatch are a really fun army. And going X and 1, so went 8 and 1 with Deathwatch. Really good. Vic, you played Aldari, the same list as Brian, who went X and 2, so 7 and 2. And Christopher Radford went 6 and 3 as well with Space Wolf. So, from our team, apart from the elf lovers, we had a really diverse, 4 different factions within us 5. But why don't you run us through where your list eventually ended up landed, Vic, and why it kind of give me 2 or 3 of the really decision points that you and Brian were going through at the end.
Yeah, I mean, me and Brian were just tweaking the last little bits of this kind of list, and this list first came into kind of fruition via Liam VSL playing Swift Strikes quite successfully in team tournaments, and Liam is one of our teammates in Ignite. So we took his concept along with some of the concepts that I'd been developing with the kind of ignore cover and reroll a wound. Kind of mashed everything together and ended up with this kind of Swift Strikes ignore cover list that we felt would be very effective on the GW terrain format. Ultimately, between the testing and the little tweaks, I think we optimized it pretty well. The list felt incredibly good on this terrain and incredibly good in this meta. We kind of narrowed it down to only Chaos Knights being a potentially bad matchup, like a straight up bad matchup. And there's a game into everything else, along with good games into the majority of the factions in the tournament. In this, we kind of assumed that not many people will be bringing a high quantity of vehicles. So we were able to kind of tweak into kind of more of the anti-infantry stuff and anti-marine stuff. And we ended up with a list which looks kind of similar to what a lot of you guys are seeing with Eldar. It's an Eldari list, so it's Harlequins plus Eldar. And we just had kind of the usual Farseer Skyrunner with all the mortal wounds, Baharoth. And then we had no ranges in this list. We had 5 Striking Scorpions, 5 Warp Spiders, 2 units of Shroud Runners, a Night Spinner, and a couple of single D cannons, along with a single Viper. And then we had the Harlequin detachment with the Shadow Seer, Death Jester, a Solitaire, which is great on GW terrain, 2 units of troops, and a Star Weaver, along with 2 Sky Weavers with Haywire, just as a tech choice in case we do hit a single big vehicle like Dave was running.
Yeah. What was the best performer and what was the worst performer?
So the overall synergy of the list is extremely good. So it's very hard to pick out one unit that's the best. You could probably just go for the best unit in the Codex, which is Baharoth.
Yeah.
Just every single game, he's fundamental to the way that you can find a path to victory. In terms of worst, I mean, I think Brian had a little bit more success with the Solitaire than I did. The Solitaire, in fact, there were multiple. The 2 games that I lost, or the game that I drew and the game that I lost, the Solitaire was a fundamental part of why that game kind of ended up being a loss, or at least one part, because you just want him to do something and you expect him to do something, but because the phase that he does something is the very last phase of the turn, if he doesn't do what you want him to do, it actually can create a little domino effect where things go wrong. But I've had success. I've taken the Solitaire to a Super-Major before, and I had a bit of success with him, but I just ended up not quite rolling what I needed in this tournament.
Yeah. Did you ever consider the unit of 5 Shroud Runners? I thought that was a really great alpha piece to have.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this terrain format, sure, the Shroud Runners are good, but they don't really do that much damage. It's more that they score points, disrupt the enemy at the same time as doing a little bit of damage. And the high volume of shots is good at picking up those little small chaffy units. So the unit of 3 achieves that without taking up too many points from your list to do the trade. So you just grab behind enemy lines, ping off a character with a few mortal wounds, and then you wire weave and slow down another unit, and then move block another unit. Like, all of these things are great for 90 points, but once you start getting to 150 points, it's a very different role. That's a fire and fading kind of role, and I don't think the damage output of the Shroud Runners is enough to do that. And because you're doing it from the deployment zone, you're only hitting targets that you are able to hit with the rest of your army anyway.
Yeah,
is my take.
Interesting. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, obviously it's I thought it was the best list going into the tournament,
Yeah.
the most powerful one because its secondary game on the GW boards is very good. Has a lot of damage. The two pilots, there were three pilots playing similar list, right? Rudd was playing it as well.
Rude
Rude,
and
sorry,
Robbo. So there's four of
Rude and
us
Robbo.
actually.
Yeah, so I thought the pilots on that were going to be very successful players as well. So that's just how the cards come down sometimes, though. So Matt Robertson actually lost to a Team Iceland prospect playing, as you said, Chaos Knights.
Yep.
Round one, that's not what you want to see. And
Exactly.
Avenger Gatling Chain Cannon, I think it's called, is quite good at killing Altari.
That matchup is a straight loss, and Brian actually also lost to Chaos Knights as well before the cut happened. So it's very telling how bad that matchup is. I did not hit Chaos Knights. I actually lost in a very favorable matchup against Josh Roberts, who's the Team England captain.
Yep.
He was playing Space Wolves on the bad terrain format, so the day one terrain format. And I also went first. So now we're talking about a lot of things in my favor here. I've gone first on pretty much an open board against a profile of army, which my army is extremely good at killing. I've played Space Wolves a lot because I play against Chris a lot, and I've never lost any test game against the Space Wolves list without that. But on this one, it did teach me a lot, because sometimes with Eldar, when you do an alpha strike and it doesn't go right, you actually have put yourself in a position where you could lose the game. And sure, you almost definitely will just win the game on that turn. But I've put myself in a position to lose the game that I didn't need to. There was definitely 100% success rate option for me to play this game out, rather than the 95% success rate option, and I hit the 5% where it goes wrong. So essentially, the way that this Eldar list actually, because this will be interesting for people listening, way this Eldar list actually wins games is by moving to an area of the board, deciding what all of the units that can actually attack it are, and then removing those units or neutering them. And then you end up with a situation where the opponent can't really attack you, and you just slowly move up the board and rinse and repeat until they run out of units and you won the game. And by going first on an open board, I essentially had free reign to do this. I just moved my army to a side of the board, killed a few units that can threaten me, and got myself into position. Then Josh has no choice but to just move forward with the units that can. They can't really get into anything of a good position. And then comes the point where you have to kill the units that he moved forward with. And I essentially had 2,000 points of my army almost shooting into this, like, just two characters in one squad, and somehow managing not to kill that. And I only killed 3 Space Marines with that from a Vanguard Vet squad. And he just ended up hitting me with these 3 little characters and just spiraling everything out of control.
That is rough.
This happened not just once, but also in my game against James Grover's Eldar, where I did the Alpha Strike. The Alpha Strike against other Eldar is brutal because you start controlling the primary all the way through the game as well. And the same kind of thing happened where you go so far down on your damage that you're ending up just fighting such a battle of attrition that you don't want to be fighting with this list. And then in that game, it's a little bit more favorable because the battle of attrition is not so scary because Eldar are so squishy. And, you kind of kill each other loads. But that one had other issues, double exploding vehicles, a Death Jester that just, can roll 100 5-ups, that kind of stuff. That ended up taking like a really comfortable 20-point win all the way to a draw, where I was like really scrapping for the draw at the end of the game.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I had a really weird run where I learned a lot about kind of, in order to win a tournament consistently, yes, you're gonna, if you play the good plays, you will get there some of the time. But to actually win it on a regular basis, it's to see moments like this and decide, actually, you know what, I'm not going to end this game early. I'm going to play this game in the most consistent way possible, where I can't lose. And I didn't take that option. I took the option where I'm going to win in a turn and I can lose. That even if it's so unlikely, I can lose. And I did.
It's very tough to realize that in the moment, though, isn't it? Because that's how we play most of the games. You want to be taking the advantage that you're given.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to see the points where it could go wrong is more difficult than it seems. I've been stuck in the same situation as well. Versus Nassim, I had a game where I didn't choose to invest the CP to reroll the wounds on my tyrant, and then he couldn't jump back, and then I was in a bad situation after that. So I appreciate the fact that it's very hard to see that, especially when maybe something didn't go right, or some things haven't gone right for a slew of time, and you're like, oh, what is going on? And then, yeah, that's tough. It's a tough run. And to do well in any tournament, though, realistically, you have to roll well. You have to be getting lucky. That's in a tournament this stacked. You have to be, things have to be going your way. 100%. Either that, or you just have to be doing something that no one else is doing.
I did miss the top 16, and then I ended up just spending the bank holiday with family. But enough about me, Dave, and my Eldar. Everyone wants to hear about what this weird and wonderful guard list that you brought ended so well with. What did you bring?
Oh, this list is so good, man. We were practicing quite a bit. I was practicing the most out of the team, I think, on the terrain, on TTS, right? And just, one thing that I found was really underwhelming were the mortars, the Kassakin, the Barbican Key, Born Soldiers in general. I just felt like, when I could see stuff, like I would be able to position where I could kill it. So all those parts, I thought, you know what, maybe there's something, maybe I should move away from that. And what I wanted to do is focus on. I ended up coming to the conclusion that I should play this list. But the two main things that got me there were, actually, I wanted to have a strong game plan, and this is something that was really successful for me at the LVO I first played. Was like I just wanted to have a very direct game plan. So my game plan was basically, on day one I can't lose because I've got a Rogel Dawn that can move 20 inches and shoot on basically open boards, and I've got Infiltrator, Sentinels, and XYZ, right? So my army was extremely good on down there. It was probably like one of the better ones out there. So I was feeling confident about that. But then I wanted to focus on the boards that are a lot more heavier. And the main commonality I realized when I looked at all these maps is that you could control all, if not most, of the objectives behind terrain. So I thought that's very interesting. So I sort of realized if I can build a list where I can score about 85 to 87 points and not do anything, then I'm going to be in a good situation, actually, because a lot of lists with the removal of Codex Warfare do struggle to have uninteractable secondaries. I think your list, Vic, the Eldari list, is one of those exceptions where you've got Behind Enemy Lines, Warp Ritual, and then RBD, which I actually struggle to beat because those are uninteractable as well. So I have to maybe be the aggressor in that matchup. So I got quite lucky in that my matchups worked out where I was the passive player. But anyway, so for the list. So there was a list a while ago that played 18 Sentinels, and it was Armored Superiority and Swift as the Wind. Now, Armored Superiority means that all of your vehicles count, your Sentinels count as 3 models for the purpose of controlling the objective, and your tanks count as 5 models. Your big boys count as 10, but I didn't have any of those. And then I'm playing Swift as the Wind. So Swift as the Wind is all your non-infantry gets +2 to movement and +1 to charge, and all your infantry gets +1 to move and +1 to charge. So not a very common thing you would think about when you think of guard. +1 to charge. You're like, what's okay, not the best. And I've complained a lot about guards' inability to have melee profiles. And Rough Riders, especially with Desolation Rings.
So hold on a second, Dave. You've just told me that Kazakin are not that good, Mortars are not that good, Barbican's Key's not that good, and now you're telling me Born Soldiers is not that good as well.
Yeah. And so Finial as well. I didn't play the Finial.
And Finial.
Yeah. So this is completely fresh take, and it's completely designed for the terrain, but I think it would be replicable if you played on another terrain format, perhaps. So I'll run through the list. So it's Armored Superiority and Swift as the Wind. Here we go. I've got Lord Sol Leontis with the 5-up gainer CP, the Grand Strategist. Now, here's the spice. I've got 1 Cadia Command Squad with the Ogren, the 2-up base save. He's got the Chainsword, and he's got the Chainsword Relic. It's the legacy of Aquilian or something like that, which is an extra 3 attacks at damage 2. All right. And then I've also got the Warlord trait for exploding 6s in combat, have 2 additional hits. and +1 to wound.
This
So
is the commander in the squad, right?
this is only the commander.
Nice.
So basically a relic and a warlord trait you will never ever see. I was playing that. But it doesn't stop there. I was playing a second command squad with the exact same loadout, but there's another melee relic you can take. It's the Power Sword relic, which is the Claws of the Desert Tiger.
This is amazing.
Which is +2 attacks, +2 strength, -3 AP, damage 2. So I had 2 commanders, 1 commander in each squad, which had relic upgrade weapons, and then the other one had the warlord trait that Iron Hand Straken usually takes for the double exploding sixes. So yeah, those were phenomenal, and I'll go into those in a bit. Then I had 40 troop. So I think 40 is a really good number, especially if you play what I'm playing 2 chimeras. So 2 chimeras means you can start 20 in reserve, 20 in the chimeras, and you're really good there. So I have 2 chimeras, all the flamers. Then I've got 3 armored sentinels, and then 3 armored sentinels, and I've got 3 scout sentinels. So they all have the plasma and the chainsword, apart from 1 armored sentinel that I couldn't find the points for. Then we got Mr. Rogel. Now, the Rogel Dawn was exceptional for me all tournament, I would say. It's now that the guards have been nerfed in terms of the Kassakin and the Finial, I do think the Rogel Dawn has certainly become a lot better. For UKTC, we'll have to test how it pans out. But for this format, this terrain format, it was beautiful. Because you can tag into the ruins, because they're big perspex, you can tag just the side of them, and you can see at really wide angles. And one thing that Anthony Vanella said to me was that on the GW terrain, if you have 24-inch range guns, that might as well be like 48-inch range, because the chances are you're going to be quite close when you shoot people. And I thought that's great. So I took all the multi-melters on the Rogel Dawn, which was a pro tip from the Polish people via Brian. And then I had the big turret for the flat 4 damage. And then I had the 2 melter guns. And then I had the upgrade Knight of Piety, I think it's called, which is the 5-up invulnerable save and the 5-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds for 25 points, I think. And that's
worth it.
I think that's want to go for that one. Because I think versus Eldari, for example, it's very hard for you to take it down in the psychic phase. And if you do die in the psychic phase, you can't shoot on death. So something I was very acutely aware of there.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So the Rogel Dawn was absolutely fantastic. I don't think I've forgotten anything this time. Oh, I have forgotten something. 30 Scions. Not in the patrol, just straight up elites. They're 2 plasma each, 2 hot shot volley guns each, the plasma pistol and the Voxcaster. They were absolutely incredible for me the whole tournament. And that was kind of my last minute swap for the Kassakin. So actually Nassim and I were talking, and he was like, why are you playing Kassakin? Especially if I wasn't playing Born Soldiers. He said, you should just play Scions because they can naturally deep strike. And they don't get the regimental buff of Swift as the Wind and armored superiority. But hey, that doesn't matter because they get a much better one. Exploding 6s to hit for the whole unit, which is, as I'll explain, very, very good. So they were fantastic. And then the crown jewel of it all. Do you know who I've forgotten?
I know who it is.
The crown jewel. My man, my main boy.
It's a vicious trap coming up here.
Whoa. Slime Marbo. That's right, boys. Slime Marbo's back. I played him at the team tournament. I wasn't impressed. But Slime Marbo was very good for me this whole tournament. He wasn't good at killing stuff, but he was a great secondary getter. So what would happen is that this list is fundamentally designed in 2 really strong ways. It has great primary play because you can zoom your Chimera, you can order it to move 16 base, and then you can move it D6 plus, so up to 22 inches, and it counts as 5 models. Otherwise, you can move it up to 20 inches, and it counts as 5 OBSEC models. And then it can carry 10 guardsmen. So a couple of my games, I won by just moving my Chimera, or I'd get out my guardsmen, advance them onto objectives, move the Chimera, and then I would tag both of their objectives and OBSEC them off them, and boom, you got no primary. So that was already really good. And then the Scout Sentinels were incredible because if I infiltrated them, my opponents were really worried about me alpha striking them, especially with the Rogel Dawn that I just deployed on the line and said, well, I can move 20 inches and shoot you. So between those 2 very aggressive elements, potentially, people were very worried, and that forced them to deploy defensively, and rightly so. But where this all comes into glory is that, and I said this to you at the tournament, didn't I, is that on day 2 and 3, I'm just going to enter into my castle, which is that my realistic game plan was actually most people would bring it down against me. And they would have to take, in the meta right now, the secondaries aren't as automatically 15, and whereas I've got very good secondaries. So actually most armies are going to have to come and pressure me. So I thought, David, if I just enter into the castle, I hold 8 primary every turn, I get the tertiary for more primary, then my secondaries are 15 on inflexible, 10 to 12 on boots because of my list design, and then banners for either 8 to 10 or R&D for 8 to 10. And lo and behold, that gets me a grand total of, I should know this off the top of my head, about 4, 7, 11, about 85 to 88 points per game, which is quite high in very competitive games.
Especially on a passive game. That's very
Exactly.
high.
And that's me. I could literally sit back and do nothing. So what maybe we should go through my day one. My day one, I played 2 new players for the first 2 rounds, and then I ran into Andy Borman, who I haven't played yet, but we've seen each other at tournaments lots. He was playing as Grey Knights with 30 interceptors and 4 Dread Knights. We played on the open mission. I went first. I could shoot his deployment zone. I think I killed 4 strike squads, 4 interceptor squads, whilst being an inch above my line, and it was more or less game from there. So,
brutal.
Yep, I ordered my Sentinels for max blast against units, and they got 9 shots each, and then, yeah, that was pretty brutal.
Ouch. Okay, lovely.
Yeah. Then round 4, I played a really interesting game, I believe, against a gentleman called Chiro, who was... Oh, no, round 4, I played against Taff from Bad Moon Cafe with his Raven Guard, which was going to be an interesting game, but I fortunately went first. And if you've played against Raven Guard before, you know that they have a very first-orientated game plan. So that game was more or less me playing very cagey, making sure Taff couldn't break any of my secondaries, and it was, very clear I was going to go for a win in that case. Then round 5, I played a young Italian man called Chiro, who was playing Imperial Knights Freeblade Lance. Now, I'm lucky enough to know quite a lot of the rules on this army, and this was definitely an interesting game because there were some nuances with the terrain where I didn't appreciate the fact that if you're on the terrain, a big knight can actually see over the top of the terrain and into your block. So,
no way. Okay.
Yeah, so that actually caught me out a few times. He said, well, I can see your Rogue Dawn because my knight's high. And I was like, oh, yep, that's a mistake. So I learned that one once, and then I kind of considered it after that. But the night matchup was very good for me. This is a matchup where the scions are just incredible. So most of the game, I would reserve all 30 scions. Unless it was a slow army, then I could start 1 on the board and 4 rerolls to hit and wound it. But the scions from Deep Strike were just absolutely phenomenal. They come down. They're very easy to get in to get reroll 1s to hit and wound of Leontis, which is critical, of course. And then you can come down, plasma shot, 4 plasma shots, rerolling 1s to hit is often like 5 hits. So then you're wounding on 3s or 2s, rerolling 1s. So the plasma is fantastic. And then I was actually using the nerfed stratagem for the 6 mortal wounds on them. I would just directly point them at 1 unit and, maybe get 4 mortal wounds or 5 mortal wounds, but that turns those hotshot las pistols and whatnot into actual damage. So they were fantastic. And the Deep Strike was so much easier to play with boots on the ground than strategic reserves like I would have had to do with Kassakin. So they were strictly there. They were incredible. I think against the Night player, I got 7 plasma shots from my Scion Scroll that came down.
I bet you love that.
3 6s. Oh, absolutely brutal. Yeah. So they were outstanding. And then it was on to round 5. So, round 6. Now, round 6 was...
Round 6, yeah.
Yeah. So round 6, that was the cut to the top 16.
So now you're through. You're into the top 16 here.
Yeah, and the top 16 is absolutely stacked, by the way. So lots of people, all like WTC top teams, best players in the world in there. So round 1, Nathan Roberts, who is an extremely lovely person. We've never played before, but I've seen him around the tournaments a lot. Super nice guy, man. He was playing a very funky Chaos Knight list where they all had different upgrades and stuff. And he's the type of person where I just said to him, Nathan, if you don't mind, like I'm not going to read all this stuff. Can you just tell me if I'm going to get royally fucked here by doing something wrong? And he's like, yeah, I'll let you know. It's fine. So I was like, thank you very much. So super lovely guy. He deployed everything on the line and went first. So I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. But he might have had a chance of winning this, but armor superiority means that his game plan is a lot more difficult to execute. It's very, very hard for him to knock me down on the primary, because what I would commonly have is my Chimera plus some dudes an inch off the wall of the whole ruin, so that my ruin was very hard to charge because of the distance required. And then my Chimera and my guys mean I have like 8 obsec models on the objective. So a lot of the way that Knights will play is I'll put a guy on there, 5 models, obsec you, etc., which is a really powerful way to play. So he couldn't break me like that. And this is a game where the Rogal Dawn absolutely shined. It killed 5 knights this game, or it brought 1 down to 1, but it killed 4 knights and brought a knight down to a wound. So I played it quite cagey, and turn 1 I just shot a knight that was going to die already, but turn 2 I gave it the full rerolls to hit order, advance and charge, advance and shoot, zoomed it into the middle ruin, melted all melters at 1 knight, everything else at another knight, boom, KO'd, killed 2 knights. Nice. And then on his turn, he had to charge, because, I mean, he's not going to shoot it to death. He had to charge it, Overwatch with full rerolls to hit, 3 melter wounds, 3 melter hits, and then bring the Slaanesh knight down to 1 wound. He killed it in combat, and then I shot with my Oppressor Cannon, and then killed one of his armigers from full with my flat damage 4 Oppressor Cannon.
Beautiful.
Oh man, it was just like we drew it up. Yeah, it was brutal. Nathan and I were both laughing at that. I mean, what are you going to do at that point, right? Yeah, then the Scions were just fantastic there. Like Chaos Knights, they don't really have access to -1 damage like Imperial Knights do, so the plasma just goes off really hot there as well. And then yeah, the command squad managed to wrap up a unit, a little autocannon knight, wrap it up in the bottom of the board, and then kill it, and then advance on as well. So that was the most successful command squad attack I had, where I dealt 10 damage to a knight. I was like, that's lovely. Great. Strength 4 +1 to wound on 4s, but I also rolled 4 6s to hit. So I had like 11, 12 hits or something like that.
What a good list, man. This list is awesome.
Gosh, it's got everything. If you can't tell, I was super trust me, the whole tournament I was buzzing. I was like, dude, this list is so much fun. Like,
you just need like a psyker or something, you need that.
Can't have it all.
I know. Yeah,
I could, but I couldn't have the points to put the psyker in the command squad properly.
So you are now 6-0, and you're through to this is quarterfinals now.
Yeah, so we're in the top 8. We didn't really know if it was win path or something like that, but my run wasn't getting any easier.
Oh no, it's only tough games from here.
Only tough games from here. So I've just beaten Nathan Roberts. I peer straight into his brother Josh Roberts on the Scouring, which. If I'm being honest, I said to Josh beforehand, I was like, and I said to Chris at dinner, I said, our teammate Chris, I was like, Chris, I'm pretty sure I don't want to play the Space Wolves on the Scouring. Like, that's probably one of my worst submissions. But here's where the game plan just really came into ownership, right?
Castle.
Josh had to take, so luckily enough, Chris, we only get the pairings in the morning, so we don't know it overnight. And Chris, as soon as I got the pairing, I went to Chris and I said, tell me about all the stratagems and everything you would do against me. And he just gives me the full rundown. I'm like, fantastic. Now, what I realized about this game is that Josh had to take Bring It Down in Warrior Pride or Oath of Moments. And those are 2 aggressive secondaries. He fundamentally needs to come at me and kill me. And with Space Wolves, the majority way that you do that is in combat, right? So what I knew about this board is that you could hold both of these objectives from within your ruin, which was obviously great for me because I put my Chimera there, and then I have OBSEC models, and it's very hard to push me on the primary. And essentially, Josh has to stage into the middle of the board, and then I have to, either make the choice of just staying still and then hoping that he can't break my castle, or there's a better way to play it, actually, which is what I did was I positioned a lot of my key units around the top end of the board, and I positioned my Rogal very carefully so it could move and see a very specific angle here. So what I did was I positioned around the top side of the board where I could eventually advance and shoot and get an angle into the staging ruins. Now, this sounds very straightforward now that I say it, but I used all those components, shot down the middle of the board, and then I would also have the command squad come out from my central ruin with the 7-inch move and +1 fixed bayonets for +1 to hit, +1 AP, and they would charge into the middle objective and clean up anything that I couldn't really get. And even if they didn't kill the whole squad, the Ogryn could oftentimes just tank a bunch of damage and gob stuff up in combat. So that's what I did, and with some clever move blocking with guardsmen and whatnot like that, and scions that would come down and shoot into those staging positions, I was able to move block a lot of the board and then clear off a lot of the staging. And after that, Josh tried to make a deep strike charge, which I failed to screen, which was an error on my behalf. But even then, he still couldn't, with that, break my primary. So after that, we kind of just talked it out and said, look, realistically, what can we do here? well, what can Josh do here? He can come out and try and stage another turn, but my board position's even better than it was before. And I've got another command squad and Leontis ready to go 14 inches and get into combat here. So based on the secondaries, it was all she wrote on that one. And the great synergy here also is that the command squad, it naturally wants to move into the middle of the board because you don't care if you lose it in this list. Whereas if you have the finial, you're like, oh, if I lose my finial, I lose lots of output and etc. Mine, I could just chuck away. You jump into the middle of the board, kill some stuff in combat maybe, and then get me a boots on the ground point for the middle objective. And every single point that I could get boots on the ground, if I could get one more point every game, if it could be an 11 or a 12 instead of a 10, that was my 85 becoming an 86 and 87.
Mm-hmm.
That was one more vehicle or something that my opponent had to kill. So they not only had to kill the command squad, but then they had to kill another vehicle as well. So yeah, the command squads were fantastico in that one. Sly Marbo, I think he did vicious trap something on this mission. But yeah, he was Sly Marbo is obviously great, guys, because he's untargetable, but he gets you boots on the ground. So even against Desolation Marines, like in this list, even if I have all my guardsmen get shot off the board, I can still get boots on the ground as well. And it's very rare that Desolation Marines can shoot off all your guardsmen, by the way, because it's only 36-inch range and you can deploy them right at the back of the board and etc. like that. So I was throwing away resources left, right, and center to make sure my opponent couldn't get their secondaries, but I could still get mine.
Lovely. Fantastic.
Yeah. So then we're on to the top four. Now the top four, guys, I had a pretty rough run here. I had Nathan Roberts, Josh Roberts, both Team England. Round 4, Manny.
Here we go.
So this mission, everything goes my wrong way. Manny gets to move the objective, which means that he could take Stubborn Defiance, which means that it's going to be a very tough game for me.
Mm-hmm.
Manny, he also had an interesting list, and I think a lot of people thought this list was very bad, but it was a very cleverly designed.
Yes.
This list was actually very good when you think about it, because he's taken basically, for all intents and purposes, 45 Dark Angel Terminators or whatever the number was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's gone for exploding sixes to hit in combat, generate an additional attack, and then he's gone for mini transhuman. And in reality, mini transhuman is just -1 to wound. You're just losing -1 to wound compared to transhuman, which is obviously good, but you're gaining a lot of damage in melee. And he's gone for 2 psychers here, and what I think his game plan was from mini games was to move both of his psychers into the he had one psyker just Inquisitor, go and do Warp Ritual, and then wrap his other psyker and his whole army to do Warp Ritual for 1 turn, and then have his whole army wrap the psyker and do Warp Ritual again and get Oath of Moments as well.
Yeah.
So the list was actually deceptively good. It was quite well designed for the terrain. Now, there was one critical part of this game where we had a disagreement about moving, etc. The judge ended up siding with me. And then what ended up happening is that I was able to shoot into a lot of units in the middle of the battlefield. And then from that, I was able to basically wipe out a lot of the resources that Manny had, to the point where I was going to deny his primary, even though he went second on the mission where you can hold, what's the mission? Secure missing artifacts. So that was the win for me there. The command squads were great in that game. Scions were very good in that game. That was going to be a very high scoring game for both of us as well. So I managed to very luckily get the W on that one as well in there. So
that one's on stream as well, actually, if people wanted to see how that played out. But yeah, I mean, because we don't get player mics, so we can't hear anything. But from how it looked for me, it looked like Manny was kind of locked out of the game almost. Because in order for him to actually play the game, he would have to come out. And the way that these slow-moving melee armies come out often is trying to make a charge into something that you put in front of them, and ideally, if possible, kind of wrap it and try and lock yourself in combat so you don't get shot by the shooting army. If that doesn't go to plan, this is exactly what happens, and Manny ends up kind of failing a wrap and losing, the army that he's put in the middle of the board.
Yeah, exactly. And whilst I'm not playing Born Soldiers, my army still does have a lot of output, especially when I can start the Scions on the board and stage them slowly. I can put the 4 rerolls to hit and wound on them, and then they're very powerful like that, because then you aim them, they hit on 2s with 4 rerolls, and I don't know if this is mathematically correct, but I just rerolled everything that wasn't a 6 and
Yeah,
tried to get a lot of shots. Well, there's another order where you can get heavy 3 instead of rapid 1, so you get more shots, but you're going to be hitting on 4s with 4 rerolls, which is only 75% success chance. But I wanted to see those 6s anyway, so
Nice.
yeah, so they were very good that game as well. Slime Arbo managed to get in there, cut some things up as well, I think.
I think this game was really fascinating to watch, but actually, it was your next game against in the finals that was extremely exciting to watch, which was against Innes Wilson, the captain of Team Scotland. And kind of going into this game, Dave, where was your head at?
So going into this game, so Innes just dispatched Brian, my teammate, and Brian
poor
comes over to
Brian.
me immediately and goes, "This is what Innes is going to try." And I kind of had an inkling because of the way that Brian had played Iron Hands too. He's like, he's going to try and do this, going to try and do that. And I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I knew kind of some of the things in the game that were going to happen, and I tried my best to prepare for them. But ultimately, I couldn't weather the storm. I lost by 3 points for this game, but we'll get into it. So at this point in the tournament, though, you're 8-0. And it's just bizarre to think like you're 8-0, like 8 wins, and it's like I guess someone has to go 8-0, but like
Yeah,
8
it's
wins
you.
is a lot. So then someone's going to go 9-0 as well. So yeah, this game is on stream too, and you can check it out. And this is the second time we've played. We played in the Goonhammer finals at that was last year, the beginning of last year, I believe. And this is my peak performance at the Leviathan Nids, and that was with player mics. But we had an absolute blast of a game. Innes is a super lovely guy. There were multiple points in the game where he gave me a nice take back, and multiple points in the game where I gave him the heads up about things, and then gave him a take back as well. And that's a nice way to have the game played. It felt more like we were playing the game just to play the game as well as we both possibly could, rather than playing the game as well as we both possibly could under the circumstances. Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, and Innes is amazing, and there are so many top level kind of competitive players that play in the UK who are like this, and it's a joy to play against them, and Innes is definitely one of them. So, and it was very obvious looking at it on the screen with like the kind of discussions. You can see your hands indicate what you guys are saying, and it was very clear you guys were having a great technical kind of exciting game of 40K.
Yeah. So Innes is playing Iron Hands, and this I think is arguably one of the strongest armies in the game, right? I don't think anyone would contend that Guard are better than Iron Hands. I don't think Guard are the best army in the game. I think Guard are maybe in the fourth or fifth.
So I'm going to make a point here about Guard, and I think the power level of Guard is in list design like what you are doing here, Dave, where the rule set is so incredibly powerful in this Guard list. The second you just take your foot off I'm going to take the most powerful units, and you start looking at, look how good my secondary and primary control is on top of having a good shooting base. It's a recipe for success in that Guard list that I think very few Guard players are going to be able to utilize and are utilizing.
Yeah.
So I'd be really careful with the statement that Guard aren't as powerful as Iron Hands. I think on average, you're going to do much better with Iron Hands than Guard. But Guard, Eldari, all of these armies absolutely have kind of extremely powerful tournament winning tools.
For sure, yeah. The reach is still obviously there, and our game was very, very close, and Innes had a number of things that went his way. So Innes is playing Iron Hands, we're playing Death and Zeal, which is just a very well-balanced mission, I think, right? It's neither here nor there.
It's a nice one.
It's a good one to end the tournament on. We can both get a bunch of primary, so I knew going into this game, I was razor-focused on the points the whole tournament, which is quite bizarre for me, if anyone who knows me. I knew that based on the game, if I hold 8-8-8, and I get 10 for the tertiary, I'm on 42 primary. Okay, so Innes might get 45, but that means my secondaries have to be 3 above him. And I thought, okay, great. So Innes ends up taking Shock Tactics and Bring It Down, and then he also takes Oath of Moment. So I thought, okay, the castle.
You're winning on paper here.
Winning on paper here, yeah.
Now, a lot, actually.
I think I could have won this game, but it would have required some absolute galaxy brain decisions that. Under the circumstances on a ninth round is just, it's, if you are the type of player that can see them, then, you are a better player than me, for example. But what ends up happening is Innes he loses the roll-off to Infiltrate. I block out one of his Infiltrators. This stuff doesn't really matter. But he ends up going second, which is quite big.
Mhm.
Now, Innes going second more or less means that I can't stop him from getting 15 on Oath of Moments. Now, that is very, very big in the game, because if he goes first, he's probably looking at like a 10, and this is a game where every single point matters.
It is a 10, but at the same point, your tertiary won't necessarily be 10 at that point, is the way I saw it.
Well, I'll always get 2 for holding the top objective, so my
Okay.
tertiary will always be 10.
Interesting.
Yeah, you
Okay.
see, because I get 2 points for holding the objective outside my deployment zone.
Oh, sorry. I think I just got it wrong. I just thought Death and Zeal was hold the center or kill a unit on the center.
Oh no, I think it's hold any of the ones in
Oh,
the
fair
thing.
enough.
Yeah,
Okay, ignore me.
yeah.
Carry on.
But if you kill hold the center, you get like an additional one, so you can get 3.
Okay.
So anyway, I thought, well, if I just hold my objectives, then Innes will get 0 on shock tactics, and I will be in the go here,
Mhm.
because essentially the primary difference will be that he will score a 12. However, he will be on a negative 15 because of shock tactics, and that was how the game played for a long time. Innes, I got a little bit unfortunate right from the get go. My 3 Sentinels, even though I CP rolled the number of hits and he doesn't get a save with 4 rerolls to hit and wound, didn't kill his speeder. And then I had to drop I dropped the Scions down to make sure they couldn't emergency disembark any part of the objective where I couldn't see it, etc. These parts kind of take a long time to work out, but this is extremely important stuff to where you need to dedicate as little resources as possible to clearing objectives, and this is a fundamental part about if you want to improve your game plan, a really important thing. So then my Scions come down, they have to clean up the scouts. But I end up hitting like a long bomb 10 charge. So this is a game defining part as well. So my Scions are strung across the middle of the board. They deny him the primary because I end up putting 1 Scion on there to contest the objective, but not to give him shock tactics. So my
Nice.
Scions don't kill the scouts, but then we're in combat after that. Now Innes comes out, and I've got a scout sentinel and 10 guys across the board, and Innes very cleverly goes for a double wrap here. Now a single wrap in most games is relatively difficult to pull off, but Innes going for the double wrap here, he charges my scout sentinel, uses all of his reroll abilities to fail as many as possible, and then curls the rest of his 2 Vanguard veteran squads around my Scions as well.
Mm-hmm.
To wrap both my Scions and my scout sentinel in the middle of the board so that I can't desperate breakout 1. And desperate breakout is something I use quite a lot this game, this tournament. And I notified Innes at the time. I said, Innes, I'll be able to pile in and consolidate. Now, it's very tricky. It's very difficult to actually lock a 10-man unit that's strung out with terrible saves and toughness 3.
Yep.
Because what you can do is, and this is kind of, I guess, one of the more advanced plays, is that you can take units, your losses, as your in your units, such that you will then have to withdraw more because of to maintain your coherency. This is something I did both in the game versus Manny and versus Innes. It doesn't actually happen that much, but I guess the 2 top players, it presented itself both back to back. Now, what ended up happening is those guys that were strung out piled in and consolidated into the rest of Innes's army. So I was able to tag one of his captains, and his captain's reasonably good in combat. And if you watch the stream on this part, after my last game, I simply said to the judge, all I want to do is tag as much stuff with these 4 models. Can you just tell me exactly where all my guys can move? And then Innes, you can say what you think and blah, 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 but I will agree with whatever you say, Judge. And so we got out extra. This is the really cool part about the tournament is that, we got out extra models. The judge was like, well, this guy's to go that way, that guy's to go that way. And him and Innes are debating around this guy that way. And, and then I'm going, okay, what have we decided on? And the judge says, you can tag this model here, but you can't tag the Tech Marine. I said, okay, cool, let's do that. Can you move my models for me? And the judge said, well, I can't move your models for you, mate. But
You just want to go get a drink, chill out.
Yeah. So, I ended up tagging him, and then I ended up a really cool part. I don't know if you have to do this, but I said, Innes, I have to slow roll my saves because if I do pass them, I can't see how many I pass automatically. So I have 3 saves to make. I can't just roll them all at once because if I pass them all, then I would have done something differently. Or if I pass 1 or 2, then I'm going to do something different. So I have to allocate it to the model. I said, this model is taking this save. Okay, I failed it. Take this model. And then, reestablishing this model's within 2 inches. This one's not. This one's not. This one is, etc. And, I'll take it on this model now, pull it. And then this model now. And then all throughout my head, I'm going, what is the, what's the best case scenario? Where can I pull out, etc., etc. I like stuff like that. I think it's kind of it's a good mental challenge, mental exercise to play. And that's how and then I was able to then desperate break out my Sentinel in the next turn. I was able to get boots on the ground as well because my Scions were still alive. So two things kind of went my way-ish there. Well, they didn't really go my way. I could do that play regardless, but my Scions were alive, so I got to get another boots on the ground. And then what ends up happening in the next couple of turns is Innes is under quite a bit of pressure. Now, my Rogel Dawn had come out to shoot some Vanguard veterans. Innes shoots 5 Desolators, 4 hits, 3 wounds. Like, they're winning on 5s with, like, almost no rerolls.
Oh, gosh.
My Rogel Dawn fails all its saves, and then he shoots, like, another Desolation squad, 4 hits, 3 wounds, and then my Rogel Dawn's dead. But, you know, reality is, at this point in the game, I was never going to win the game by tabling Innes's army. Innes's army has way more output than mine, and it's reasonably more dynamic.
I mean,
so,
you say that, but where it looked like on the scorecard here is that Innes is gonna have to make an approach turn now that he missed that wrap.
Exactly.
Because he does not win unless he hits shock tactics and also denies your primary.
Yeah. The problem here is that Innes was able to stage well because my key pieces like Armored Sentinels and Rogel Dawn couldn't get my staging part to where I would get the first jump onto his staging units.
Yep.
So my Sentinels were at the back, and so was my Rogel Dawn. So he was able to stage an army where my Armored Sentinels couldn't come out, chop them up, or shoot, chop, charge, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So he was always going to come bearing down, and I made the one mistake I made in the game here was that I made what I said to Innes was a very natural play. Now, when you're playing a game under time constraints, it's very akin to chess, for example. The way I like to think about Warhammer is that at any given point of time, there's like 4 optimal moves that you can do. At the most optimal move is extremely hard to see, but as playing a tournament, if you're consistently making moves that are within the top 1, 2, 3, 4 most optimal moves, if you think about like a computer chess engine recommendation, then you're going to be doing on par very well. I probably made here like the 3rd or 4th most optimal move, and it looked like a very natural move, right? Mm-hmm. So what I did was I put 4 rolls to hit, fixed bayonets on my command squad. I'm going to jump in the middle, chop up some Vanguard veterans, contest the objective, not give them shock tactics, get boots on the ground as well. And that seems like a very natural play to do. The reality is that Innes was able to then use that command squad to slingshot a lot of his army. Really well done. Shoot off 3 of the models, slingshot the army across so that he could then tag in his Rights of War models, dump all the scouts on the objective, and by just 1 model, beat me with 11 OBSEC, 10 OBSEC models to 10 OBSEC models, I think it was. And there was so much stuff before that as well. He shot his Desolation Marines into my Scions that were on the objective. I used the ability to -1 AP and then no rune rerolls. I even CP rerolled a save because I knew every single model here was going to count. But yeah, I wasn't able to do it. And that was when he was able to 4 me on the primary and then also get 4 for shock tactics. So yeah. That was a massive swing in the game.
As soon as that point happened, we I looked at the scorecard and I was like, this is going to be ultra tight now.
Yeah, and that's where I said to Innes, I think after he did that and we confirmed the number of models, I said, I think you got it now, mate. And so after that, I just tried my best to shoot everything off as much as possible, use all my resources, and then hopefully hit some very long charges with my Sentinels to the point where I could tag just all of his army and then he couldn't maybe get a 12, or he couldn't get to bring it down or shoot into combat or something like that as well. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. My charges I hit were quite small. Leontis wasn't able to kill enough of the Vanguard veterans in combat. And yeah, like he has the stratagem for 5-up Feel No Pain, which on his Wound 2 models is really good against my relics. Yeah. Or my flat 2 damage that I invested in. I think I killed 1 Vanguard veteran with my command squad. It was a bit sad. But yeah, it was it was a really close game. I remember thinking during the game, I was like, I just can't believe that I'm going to get second here. It seems kind of surreal. And it was just such a good game that regardless of the outcome, you were going to be happy that you played well.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say this story here because there was a chat on one of the Discord channels. There's lots of like really good players on there, and there's one player, Typhus, who's on there, Team Poland Typhus, and he said, "Iron Hands never win this game. Sorry, no, Guard will never win this game. Iron Hands are so super, super favored. And then there was another guy, and he said, "Look, Vic, I'll make a bet with you. If Dave can make it to round 3, then I'll bet I'll give money to charity, whatever your charity of choice is." And I was like, "Hold on a second, guys. Dave has such an obvious and natural passive game on this. If you look at the board and the scoring, that regardless of what's going to happen, this is going to be a very tight game. And if anything, Innes is going to have to make moves to try and score a small victory." And then after the first few turns, my call was, look at the board state, Typhus. This is 10 to 15 point win for Dave. And then, you know, Innes got those tiny little things that just brought him in. That getting you down to a 4 in primary and getting the shock tactics completely changed that game and the board position.
And that was actually a very interesting. If you want to go back and watch that stream, I tried my very best to try and think of the best way that I could stop him from getting on that objective.
Yeah, you put Guardsman on the outside of a ruin, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. I dumped everything on the outside so that he couldn't. And my KD command squad tried to tag the speeders before that turn, so that he couldn't fall back and disembark, because we looked up the strats. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to put all my guardsmen on the outside, my Chimera an inch off the wall so you can't charge, string out all my sounds an inch off the wall so the charge is longer, have my Leontis there to make them obsec, and
like the final part of that story is that at the end of the game, Typhus said he's never seen someone play guard like that before. And I think generally it was just everyone was just saying like that was such a good game from both players, the level of tactical nuance there.
Yeah. Well, I'm blushing a bit more, but
it was awesome, man. That was such a good set of streams at the end there. Gosh.
Yeah. It was a wicked event. I was absolutely shocked, but I was so stoked with Innes as well to win. He's in the 3 Super-Major club as well. He got an awesome trophy as well. He got like this handmade blacksmith trophy, which is like really cool to see. I got like a chainsword thing that's like silver, which is really awesome as well. Brian got the golden ticket. Boris, our 0.5 team, our half teammate, as we always joke, won best overall, actually, which is a huge accomplishment. You have to win best painted, more or less, and to basically make the top 16 as well with World Eaters. So congratulations. He also got the golden ticket as well. Brian Seipp came 3rd overall, beating Manny Chima in the final round, and then our other teammates did really well as well. So all in all, I mean, an absolute powerhouse performance from the team, I think, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And it kind of pushes us nicely into our next event, Dave, because the team is going to be going to Birmingham Teams Tournament as our next event, which is going to be extremely interesting for us as a team.
Yeah. I feel like this event as a team, we really consolidated because it was the first time we had 5 out of 6 of us. So it was awesome to have everyone come together. But Birmingham's going to be awesome as well. We'll have myself, Vic Vijay, Brian Seipp, Jocko Johansson, and then we'll also have Boris Mitchev coming as well. So hopefully we're going to ignite the Birmingham Super-Major, the Birmingham Teams Tournament, and it'll be a great time no matter what.
I think that's going to be a really exciting one for us. We're going to try and be a bit intelligent with it. And that'll potentially be our last event of 9th edition.
Last event for 9th edition.
Oh my God.
Signing it off.
Crazy.
It's been great. We'll have to do a giant 9th edition retrospective.
Yeah, a round table.
A round table. That would be cool. Maybe we should organize something in IRL. We can get some microphones around. That would be awesome.
Fantastic. And I think that neatly brings us to the end of this episode, guys. I think we're on time, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. I would love to hear a little bit of interaction here, because there were kind of 2 halves to this. I think the first half, where we talked about the terrain format, the differences, etc., can spark a lot of discussion about this. And I think the discussion about what terrain and stuff we primarily use in the UK is a very very important thing that's going to go into 10th edition, in my opinion. Fantastic, guys. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon by the Fireside.
Thank you for listening to the 40K Fireside podcast. Vic and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.